Chapter 2. They say Vaporous has been thrice forged in blood. First, upon the wreckage of the settlers' ships that shattered against its shores. Second, upon the skeletons that pollute its vast mines. Third, upon the soldiers who took back their nation in the War of the Nobles. Travel Journals of Lord Reginald Blackrook.
Oh, hey Nathan. Wasn't expecting to run into you. Mind if we get going?
Lena said quickly as she pulled her dirty coat a little tighter and looked behind her nervously, her eyes shifting into a cyan hue.
I've been looking everywhere for you. Are you okay? Where have you been? What have you been doing? And what's in the pouch?
Nathan asked rapidly. His earlier frustrations vanished, replaced with a sudden need to make sure she was okay.
Everything's fine. Just been up to the usual,
Lena said, glancing over her shoulder again.
That doesn't reassure me at all. What have you been doing?
Nathan asked, hungry for more details. He knew she'd done something, and he needed to know how bad it was. If she messed with the wrong person, it would mean trouble for all of them.
Yeah, sorry. We really need to run,
Lena stressed, looking again.
What's going on, Lena?
Nathan insisted, getting up to one knee and wiping some water and snow from his eyes. Lena gasped. Nathan finally took his eyes off her and followed her line of sight, feeling a spike of panic when he spotted 3 furious officers. They were fighting their way through the crowd, shouting at people to get out of their way. He snapped back to Lena and noticed something glimmer inside the pouch as she scooped it up. His stomach turned as he realized what was in it, and he glared at his little sister accusingly. "What did you—" Lena shot to her feet, grabbing Nathan's hand and lifting him as if he were as light as a feather.
No time to talk. Run!
She yelled, dragging Nathan along behind her. Nathan nearly tripped over a bank of snow as Lena broke into a sprint.
We're going to talk about this later,
he yelled angrily. The two wove through the crowd. Most hardly spared a glance at the fugitives before they quickly moved out of the way of the officers. Nathan glanced over his shoulder, spotting the men gaining on him and Lena. He cursed. They had maybe a minute before they were caught. He quickly scanned the street and buildings around him, spotting an escape.
Lena, ladder to the right,
he called. Lena turned, immediately spotting the ladder. She scampered up it like a squirrel, taking the rungs 2 at a time with her gloved hands and boots. Nathan closed his fingers around the frozen rungs and yelped in pain, nearly reeling back from the ladder. The frozen metal burned. He gritted his teeth, bit down another pained yell, and moved up the ladder quickly, urged on by the shouts and screaming whistles of the pursuing officers. The snow had built up into large blackened mounds on the roofs around them. Without the wall of squished-together buildings to block it, the wind whipped the falling snow and sleet into his face, forcing him to shield his eyes with his arm. He looked towards the darkening clouds worriedly. It would become hard to see soon.
Next building over!
Lena pointed forward to the next rooftop. Like most of the terraced buildings in Frey, it was sharply angled on the sides, but instead of coming to a point, its top was flat. She started forward, the mounds of snow hardly slowing her. Nathan used the path she created to stay at her heels. Just before he hopped over the small wall that divided the roofs, he slipped on a patch of ice, causing him to land with a tumble on the adjacent building.
Great, we got the active ones,
Lena groaned, returning to help Nathan back to his feet. Nathan looked back and groaned as well, spotting the men climbing over the edge of the building from the ladder. Normally, once someone reached the roofs, they were more than happy to give up the chase. He glanced at the bag Lena held tightly in her hand, worried about how much she had taken to warrant such avid pursuers.
Why didn't you take out the ladder?
Lena shot at Nathan.
Don't even start,
Nathan said out of the corner of his mouth as they started to run again. He was tired and cold. He couldn't hope to rip a whole ladder off a building in that condition. They ran from roof to roof, ducking and hopping around various pipes and wires that snaked across and over the buildings. The men pursuing them slowly began to fall away as they became more cautious about the icy roofs. As the distance between Nathan, Lena, and the officers grew, the louder the yells for them to stop became, mixed with the occasional insult. The next rooftop was covered in a layer of ice, courtesy of a shattered water pipe, nearly causing them to skid into a wall of pipes that nearly bisected the roof. The wall had small gaps in it, just large enough for 2 street rats to squeeze through.
Hurry through,
Nathan ordered.
but now!
Lena dived through the largest gap she could find, getting stuck halfway through. Nathan looked back, dreading how close the officers were. They were only a handful of buildings away. The thought of escaping didn't even cross his mind. Instead, he dashed over to Lena's kicking legs.
Suck in your gut,
He shouted as he grabbed her legs.
Did you just call me?
Stop! Hearing the shouts over the wind sent a surge of strength through him, and he pushed with what little muscle he had. Lena's legs disappeared through the gap. She escaped, and that was what mattered. Nathan turned around just in time to see a hand reaching for him. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding being grabbed. He looked around, spotting the silhouettes of the other 2 men still 3 buildings away. His mind worked fast. One of them must have sprinted ahead. He could handle just one.
That's it! You're going over the side of the building!
The officer screamed. He approached quickly, yanking a baton from his belt. Nathan called on the magic inside him, sending out his mind to sense for nearby loose metal, and found an old rusted pipe buried under the snow. He pushed the magic into his arm and thrust his hand out toward his target, unleashing his will on the pipe. The metal pipe shot out of the snow mound like a missile and struck the officer in the back. The man shouted in pain, stumbling forward and slipping on a patch of ice. He was half off the roof before Nathan grabbed him. He planted a foot on the edge of the small brick wall that lined the flat roof and used all his weight to haul the man back onto solid ground. Corrupt or not, he didn't want more blood on his hands than was necessary. They both collapsed onto their backs. Even in the snow, Nathan could see how pale the man now looked.
You...
Nathan punched the man as hard as he could, knocking him out just as the other 2 officers were reaching his building. He took a sharp breath and ran for the large gap in the pipe wall. He dove into it, nearly hitting Lena, who was trying to get back to his side. He yelled as the metal burned his exposed skin and felt several buttons tear from his coat as he forced himself through. Like Lena, he got stuck at his waist.
Hold on!
Lena shouted, dropping the bag and grabbing Nathan's arms. She yanked him through just as he felt hands wrapping around his legs. She quickly hauled him to his feet, scooped up the bag, and together they ran. One of the officers tried to force his way through the gap, but only managed to get himself stuck. The remaining man punched the wall of pipes in frustration as Lena threw a mocking laugh back at them as she and Nathan vanished into the snow. The 2 finally came to a stop at the corner of a building that sat at the edge of a courtyard. Its only connection to the buildings on the other side of the open market below were numerous rusted pipes, one wide enough to walk on, and dozens of icicle-covered wires. Nathan bent over, his hands on his knees, each cold breath prickling his lungs. Lena sat down on the ground, breathing hard and wiping the snow and water from her face. The sleet was gone, and now only snow fell, obscuring the far side of the street. A show of lightning briefly lit up the clouds, and a dull roll of thunder rumbled across the sky. Down below, people braved the weather to go about their browsing of the market, their laughs or yells barely carrying over the wind. Nathan looked accusingly at Lena, who simply smiled back innocently. He made a sudden grab for the pouch, but Lena jumped up and danced out of his reach.
Not so fast,
she said. Give me the pouch, Nathan demanded, his fanged incisors a little more visible than need be.
Okay, hear me out. You see...
She was drowned out by a roar in the sky that didn't belong to the building's storm. A small airship appeared from around a factory, skimming the pipes that ran over the streets. Its metallic hull was bathed in the light of the red runes that circled its wings and engines. The airship stopped and hovered over the marketplace. Streams of steam spewed from its sides as it swung about to face the 2. A light from the bottom of the airship flickered to life, illuminating Nathan and Lena.
Lena, move!
Nathan ordered, turning to run back across the roofs. With large, panicked eyes, Lena jumped over the edge, making her way across the pipe that ran over the market. Nathan gasped at the sight, and before he knew it, he had already jumped over onto the pipe as well to go after her. The pipe groaned loudly under the weight. He stopped in his tracks. "Lena, no! Come back!" His shout turned into a panicked yell as the pipe gave way in a crunch of twisting metal and splintering rust. The snow did little to cushion their fall as they crashed into the cobblestones. Several stalls were crushed under the pipe, and water belched forth from its now exposed ends, covering the entire courtyard in a sloshing mix of water, soot, and snow. The crowds around them parted with shouts of surprise at their disastrous appearance. He ignored the painful pop from his neck and crawled over to Lena.
Lena! Lena, are you okay?
He yelled, panicked, his heart pounding hard and his hands shaking. The idea of Lena being hurt destroyed any other thought or concern in his mind.
Ow! Landed on my shoulder.
Lena winced as she tried to get up. He helped her to a sitting position, careful of her shoulder.
Get up, we need to move,
he said quickly, some of his sense returning now that he knew she wasn't hurt badly. Overhead, the sides of the airship opened, and 8 men jumped out. Wires attached to the backs of harnesses slowed their fall as they maneuvered their way through the pipes and wires that hadn't been knocked aside in the collapse. Their boots were hardly on the ground before they released themselves from the wires with a pull of a short lever and started to circle the two. Nathan hastily placed himself between the closest officer and Lena. He held up his hands and hoped he had all the attention on himself. His mind sensed for the metal around them, and he started to draw on the small amounts of magic within him.
Let me explain. I'll return.
Pain exploded from the back of his head as he felt the crack of a baton. He fell to the ground, lights dancing around his dazed vision.
Nathan!
Lena shrieked. She jumped to her feet, striking the man who had struck him. She crouched near Nathan protectively, her eyes a cold, icy hue. The water around her started to rise in small streams. She focused on the man who had attacked Nathan, not noticing the officer who crept up behind her. The man struck her over the head with his baton, hard enough to knock her unconscious. The streams of water she had summoned collapsed. Nathan roared at the sight of Lena being struck. He leapt at the man, dragging him to the ground, his fists striking repeatedly. Someone kicked him off the man. He rolled for a moment before he tried to jump to his feet, but an officer rushed over and kicked him several times in the ribs. Nathan gasped and grunted with each blow. He struggled to ignore the pain stabbing at his sides as he strained to keep his water-rimmed eyes focused. The man stopped, leaving Nathan clutching his burning side, and walked over to the unmoving body of Lena, roughly pulling the pouch from her grasp.
Get away from her!
Nathan screamed. He tried to get up again, but was given another kick in the ribs for his efforts. His chest heaved painfully, forcing rough coughs past his dry throat. The man who had taken the pouch raised his hand high, making a spinning motion with it. The airship didn't respond initially as it fought against the wind battering it. When it stabilized, 2 hatches opened on its belly, exposing a cable in each, which lowered downward as Nathan and Lena's wrists were tightly cuffed. Their cuffs were attached to clamps at the end of the cables, and, after another signal from below, the airship retracted the wires. Nathan and Lena were lifted into separate cells housed in a closed-off room at the back of the airship and were left dangling there as the hatches below them closed. Nathan shook his head, trying to clear away the last lights that spun around his vision. His head and ribs throbbed painfully, and he could barely feel his fingers through the tight cuffs, but that didn't matter to him, not until he made sure Lena was okay. Once the dancing lights faded away, he looked around for his sister, quickly spotting her in one of the cells on the other side of the airship. The sound of retracting wires vibrated through the walls around him. Through a small window in the door that separated the cells from the crew, he was able to see movement as the crew returned. When the doors closed, the airship tilted, steam rushing through the pipes in the walls, and a roar erupted from the engines as the vessel flew forward. "A magic user," someone said, his voice muffled by the door. "Blood or pure? One is the escaped con, I know it. Picking up, can't fly much longer. Hear the game last night on the radio? What a turnaround by..." The airship suddenly lurched downward and to the left dangerously. A bright flash of light shone through the small window. The thunder drowned out the startled yells of the crew as they tried to get their footing again. Nathan swung wildly in his cage, crying out as his wrists felt like they were about to be pulled from his arms. A sputter came from the back of the airship, mixing with the sound of grinding gears and steam exploding out. A loud, tearing pop came from the back of the airship as its hull rattled and the terrifying image of something falling off the airship flashed through Nathan's head.
Stupid storm! Out of time! We have to land this thing!
Nathan frantically looked over at Lena, the fearful pit in his stomach growing larger by the second. He knew the police wouldn't turn a blind eye to her forever. Their father's influence could only go so far, and he didn't want to think about what would happen to her if this was the time when they finally had enough. He needed to get her out of there quickly. Nathan focused, and magic flowed through him, bringing with it the familiar tingling sensation as he focused it through his arms. He stared at the cuffs, picturing them bend away in his mind, and focusing his will. He released the energy, and with a flick of his wrist, the cuffs bent open. He dropped down, taking a deep breath as he felt his head become light. He didn't wait for his head to steady and turned his attention to the bars of his cage. After a quick guess, he sucked in his gut and squeezed through the bars. Even for his thin frame, it was a tight squeeze, but he was free. He carefully crept to Lena's cell and squeezed through the bars. Again, he focused his magic and will, picturing the metal restraints coming apart. With a flick of his wrist, she was free. He caught her as she fell, holding back a cough as his lightheadedness worsened.
Lena? Lena!
He whispered, shaking her slightly.
5 more minutes,
she mumbled.
Lena!
Nathan said a little louder. Lena jolted awake with a jump.
I'm up. My head,
she said, rubbing the back of her head.
Besides the head and shoulder, how are you?
Nathan quickly asked.
I'm fine. A little sore.
Good, Nathan said, making his displeasure clear in his tone. He looked around, trying to think of a way to escape. Lena looked away from Nathan, her worried eyes downcast and shifting into a cyan hue.
Nathan, what were you thinking? You know we're not supposed to do this anymore,
Nathan hissed. Lena was about to answer when he cut her off.
Actually, tell me later. We need to get out of here, before we end up at the station again.
He had hardly finished speaking when the airship descended and the hatch opened. They fell and smacked hard into the ice-covered cobblestones below. One look was all he needed to know where they were. The walled courtyard was more familiar than he wanted it to be. Men rushed about, tightening tarps over several other airships lining the walls. The building at the end of the yard was nearly as large as a factory and built with thicker stone than anything else in the district. The station was bare, not a single vaporin flag waving from its half a dozen flagpoles. The many hooks that normally held them had small bits of red and black fabric clinging to them, even as the wind viciously whipped. Over their heads, the airship screamed as a loud bang came from the left engine. The airship floated over to men furiously waving their arms to try and guide it down. Landing gear appeared from the belly, and just as it seemed to be making a safe landing, the sky split open and lightning struck the airship. The lights inside exploded, plunging the cockpit into darkness, and the flight runes disappeared. The airship dropped like a stone, and men jumped to safety as the metal hulk smashed into the ground in a shower of sparks and snow. Nathan instinctively flung himself over Lena, even though they were far from the danger of even the sparks. Around them, the officers' faces went white. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others ran over to start covering the airship with a tarp or pull the crew out.
That just blew the steam drive,
a man close to Nathan shouted over the wind and snow.
We'll fix it after this storm,
a bearded constable with a lieutenant's pin shouted back.
With what? We went through all the money already. We'll get money from old Martha. Now get these two inside.
The bearded constable pointed to Nathan and Lena. The two were yanked to their feet. Some of the men pulled out new cuffs, while others drew their batons. Lena locked her eyes on the closest officer and looked ready to attack the man.
Lena!
Nathan yelled over the wind. His mind was already racing with every excuse, bribe, and favor he could try to get them out of the station. He was worried enough about every terrible thing that could befall Lena, and wasn't in the mood to have her worsen the situation. Lena opened her mouth to argue, but when she spotted the look in his eyes, she backed down. Nathan held his hands out, allowing himself to be restrained again, and Lena begrudgingly did the same. The two were half dragged, half marched into the buildings through a set of metal doors. They escaped the wind, but not the cold. The ice had found its way into the dirty halls and cramped cells that made up the lowest floor of the building. The other prisoners hardly spared a glance at the passing procession, but a few orcs in the cells eyed him as he passed. He didn't bother to return their glares, afraid that he wouldn't be able to contain how nervous he was becoming with each step they took deeper into the building. Before they turned into a new hallway, an orc screamed, "Valoran! Rokal hasn't forgotten!" Lena shivered as the words echoed through the halls. Nathan looked at her worriedly and took her hands in his, squeezing hard. He gave her a small smile to calm her. "It's okay," he whispered. Lena nodded quietly. The two were thrown into a tiny room that only had a table and 2 chairs. With a slam of the door, they were cut off from any sounds outside the room. A single bulb of light hummed above them, flickering occasionally, and the stench of the cells still managed to reach them somehow. Lena slumped down into a chair, disheartened. She stared at some spot on the floor with a deep frown. Her eyes slowly shifted into a deep navy blue. "This is bad," Nathan thought to himself. He tried to calm down, but his mind was going too fast. All he could do was pace and try to sort everything out one at a time. He allowed the silence to continue between Lena and him for nearly half an hour. As scared as he was for her, he was also frustrated enough to scream, and he didn't want to talk again until he had everything straight. Unlike his father, weaving words in the heat of the moment was never his strongest skill. He needed to think first. "All right, explain," Nathan finally said, frustrated. Lena didn't say anything, keeping her eyes trained on the floor. "I can't help you if I don't know what you did," Nathan said, his voice seeming louder than it was in the quiet room. Lena shrugged. "Long story short, I was in a rotten mood. Wanted to have a little fun to lift my spirits. So I decided to steal some notes from the bank." She summed it up as if it was the most natural thing in the world, but her tone was deflated. Nathan looked at her in shock. "How much did you take?" he asked quickly. Lena's expression became sheepish. "A couple hundred." "A couple... Lena, what were you thinking? Do you have any idea how much trouble we're going to be in?" "I was thinking about you and Dad," she blurted out, finally looking at him. "I know how much you want to leave here, but we're never going to get out of here just running that pub. I just figured we could use a shortcut." She sniffed and wiped her nose on the back of her wet sleeve. Nathan's expression softened slightly, and some of his frustration subsided. She wasn't wrong, but he couldn't live with himself if leaving Frey meant she had to take needless risks. "Lena, I'm not worth this much he started to say, but was cut off by the sound of the lock turning. Relief rushed through him when Jack walked through the door, his hefty coat and cap still covered in snow. The pouch of knots swung in his hand, and he looked at the two with his usual hard glare and frown before he uncuffed them. Jack set the pouch on the table before sinking into the open chair with a deep sigh. Its top hung open, and Nathan spotted the heaps of gold and silver glittering as they caught the light. His heart jumped at the sight of it. He had never seen so much money in one place. Just as quickly, he noticed how much extra room was in the bag from when he first spotted it in the streets, making him wonder how many hands it had passed through before Jack got a hold of it. Jack leaned forward, putting his elbows on the table, his inspector pin suddenly more noticeable. The room seemed to become colder with his action as a chill ran down Nathan's neck, and his frozen breath created larger clouds. Jack's eyes bored into Lena, and his frown worsened. "Stealing over 500 knots," he said slowly, before his eyes snapped to Nathan. And Nathan, I thought you left this all behind you. You were supposed to keep her out of trouble. Didn't that incident with the Talons teach you anything? He said harshly. Nathan broke eye contact, too ashamed to look him in the face. Jack continued in a slow, steady tone that drove each word into the two. Now, there's water damage at the bank, destroyed public property, an injured officer who fell trying to help carry an unconscious man down from a building after chasing you, and one of our airships might be out of commission because they redirected to capture you in a storm instead of returning straight here when the lightning started. What were you two thinking, stealing this much? He slammed his fist onto the table.
Jack, it's all my fault,
Lena pleaded, her eyes now an aqua hue.
Nathan and my dad had nothing to do with it. I was doing this all on my own.
No, Nathan spoke up.
It's just as much, if not more, my fault too. If you're going to do anything, you'll have to do it to me. What? No, it's all my fault. Let me make up to my mistake.
Lena shot at him.
I'm your brother, so that means I'm taking the fall for this,
Nathan said firmly.
I'm trying to be responsible here,
she argued.
And I'm trying to keep you out of even more trouble.
Enough, both of you, Jack snapped. He paused to think until he noticed Lena rubbing her shoulder. Are you two all right? Do you need a doctor?
No, just a little banged up,
Lena said. Same, Nathan said. Good. Jack leaned back. You two realize I'll have to tell Eric about this.
But,
Lena started. No buts, Lena. He's your legal guardian, so he needs to know. Jack cut her off. Lena looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair after the declaration. Jack looked them both in their eyes. I know that Eric's bar doesn't make that much, and it can be hard to get by. Trust me, I do. However, you cannot go around robbing banks whenever you want. Eric's connections cannot protect you from everything here. I think you two would have enough scars to have learned that by now. What you two need is to straighten out a bit, he said, looking more at Lena than Nathan, with barely any sympathy in his voice. Find better jobs. I can get you both jobs here. Granted, it'll probably just be sweeping the floors or cleaning toilets, but it would be a start, he offered. Dad would never approve of that, Nathan said, already hearing his father's words. Yeah, and Lena took a deep breath and did her best man's voice. It would draw too much attention to us. Jack was quiet for a long time as he looked at them. His eyes darted to the pouch several times, and a conflicted expression became more and more apparent on his face the longer the silence went on. After several minutes, he took a deep breath and took 3 gold knots out of the bag, handing them to Nathan. Nathan stared, unsure what to do at first. He carefully took them as if they were made of glass. Lena leaned over, staring in shock before glancing at Jack.
Why does he get some and I don't?
She asked. The two looked at her sharply, and she sank back into her chair. Right. Jack picked up the bag and tied it off. I heard that you have been putting money to the side for a while now to get out of fray. Those should help. Thank you, was all that Nathan managed to choke out.
Happy you finally got that stick out your butt. Becoming a rule breaker on us, are ya?
Lena snickered. Don't get used to it. Come on, let's get you two home, Jack grumbled. Already? It usually takes longer, Nathan asked, pocketing the coins. It's been a slow day, and Eric called in earlier just in case we caught her. Besides, the chief owes your father a favor. Along with everyone else in this city, it seems. I guess the chief figured a swift release would make them even, Jack said as he got up and opened the door. Jack swiftly led the two through the halls and toward the courtyard. The snow and wind hadn't died down in the time they were indoors. Instead, it had worsened into a full blizzard. Several of the tarps covering the airships had blown away. Thunder and lightning rumbled and flashed over the city, and snow was being flung through the wind, obscuring the far side of the courtyard. The snow was a bright white as it fell faster than the ashen air above Frey could darken it. Jack looked worriedly out into the storm, His eyes narrowed so tightly they were almost closed as he tried to see through the blizzard. "I don't think you can get home in this," he said in a strained voice as he held the door open against the wind. "I can set something up in my office until it's died down." Looking out into the courtyard, Nathan was inclined to believe him. His breaths became shallow at the thought of traversing the streets, but he had to return to their father, to let him know they were okay. As safe as it would be in the station, he wouldn't be able to rest at all if he left his father to brave the blizzard alone.
We need to get home. I know some back alleys that'll keep us out of the wind until we get there.
"Nathan?" Lena asked worriedly. Her navy eyes became a bright cyan as she watched the snow.
We need to get back to Dad,
Nathan said firmly. Jack looked down at him with both confusion and annoyance. "Nathan, you—" The lights above them suddenly died, and several startled yells came from the halls behind them. Jack sighed wearily, almost like he was expecting it. "Damn it, can this day get any worse?"
Maybe they'll come back on soon,
Nathan said. He tried to sound reassuring, but he had no idea how lights worked. It was one of the reasons he preferred candles. "And I'll become the next king," Jack replied, unamused. "I can't make you stay, but I am asking you to." Lena opened her mouth, but Nathan cut her off.
We need to get home before our dad does something stupid out of worry.
Lena glanced at Nathan but didn't say anything. Jack looked back at the blizzard with a defeated expression on his face. "Move quickly and don't stop. If this keeps up, it'll become a whiteout before long."
Thanks, Jack. See you around,
Nathan said. He took Lena's hand and left. The wind nearly knocked them off their feet, and the cold clawed at their skin. Nathan would have tightened his hold on Lena's hand, but her grip was already like a vice, crushing his finger so hard he had to bite down a cry of pain. A few figures were still in the streets, mostly trolls whose massive, shaggy forms were barely affected by the blizzard. The rest had all retreated indoors to homes, pubs, or whichever shops would shelter them. Nathan stayed close to the buildings, working off landmarks he could see in the flurry. When he spotted Buckingham's Inn, its large cartwheel sign barely hanging on by a single chain, he knew where he was. He looked over his shoulder to check on Lena, but he couldn't even see her face through the snow. He could barely even feel her gloved grip in his freezing hand. Nathan squinted and felt the wall nearest to him, trying to make out the entrance to the back alley near Buckingham's. He ducked into it immediately, tugging Lena in behind him. She was breathing hard, and he realized how deeply he was winded himself.
We're almost there. It's just a few more turns,
Nathan said reassuringly. Lena nodded but remained silent, focusing on her breathing. By the time they arrived at the bar, what little sunlight they had was fading quickly. Nathan guessed they only had an hour at most before the streets were plunged into total darkness. Their district wasn't rich enough to afford electric street lamps, and no lamplighters were going to go out in a blizzard. Two trolls stood on either side of the door, indifferent to the weather. When they spotted Nathan and Lena approaching the door, the trolls let out a low grumbling growl that died away in the wind. The feeling of relief Nathan felt at the sight of the building died away as he glared right back at the trolls. Every few days or so, old Martha sent some thugs to act as bouncers for his dad as a sign of friendship, but everyone knew they were there to act as enforcers for the crime boss. Their street was on the edge of old Martha's territory, but it was her territory nonetheless, and she made sure everyone remembered it. His mouth was already half open to throw an insult at the two before he stopped himself. Any sign of his father's connections was enough to make him want to scream, but he had more important things to worry about. The bar was empty, but held signs of a busy day. Empty mugs littered the bar, and chairs lay cast aside near almost every table. Dozens of half-melted candles were lit around the room to provide some light, but they could barely reach the dark ceiling. Their father leaned against the countertop with his head resting in his hands, looking like he was asleep, until, at the sound of the creaking door, his eyes snapped open. Nathan was initially worried for his father, but that quickly turned to worry for himself and Lena when the man's eyes narrowed dangerously. Mr. Verloren grabbed his cane and limped around the bar, never taking his eyes off them. Each pounding thud of the metal cane on the wooden board seemed to shake the walls as he approached. "Where have you two been?" he demanded, pointing at them both with his free hand. His scowl was deep enough to look like a canyon had been etched across his sunken face. Before either of them could open their mouths to speak, Mr. Verloren continued. "Do you have any idea how worried I was? Do you know how hard it is for me to run a bar single-handedly, much less in my state, especially when I know that you two are running around who knows where? You know how much a troll can drink, and—" He continued for some time before he stopped to collect himself. "Are you two okay?" he asked in a calmer voice, after a few breaths to steady himself.
Yeah, we're both fine. Just got a little lost,"
Nathan said, lying about their day. He didn't want to worry about his father any more than he already had. With a glance, he and Lena shared a mental sigh of relief their father hadn't mentioned the robbery during his rant. Mr. Verloren looked over the two with suspicion. Nathan could already see his father's mind working to uncover the day's true events through whatever clues he could spot. "Well, I'm happy you're back before the sun set. Where were you today, Lena?" he asked as he started to limp back to the bar.
"Helping Miss Jola."
Lena sounded earnest, but her eyes remained a navy blue.
"Was running things around the district."
Mr. Verloren's calculating eyes moved over Lena's as he moved around the bar, and she suddenly found the dark ceiling remarkably interesting. "Jorla, huh?" he asked with a half-smile. "Well, come on. It's time for dinner." Both their stomachs growled at the sight. Feeling a little embarrassed at how loud it was, Nathan realized he hadn't eaten all day. Mr. Verloren cooked a simple meal in the tiny one-man kitchen next to the bar and headed for the back room after handing over the plates. As Nathan and Lena followed, they exchanged a silent look and agreed to convince Miss Jorla to play along with the ruse. They took their places at the tiny table as their father dug a newspaper out of his coat, took his seat, and held it up to a candle. "Finally, a chance to read," he murmured contentedly to himself. He glanced briefly at the crumpled photo, now back at its proper place on the back table, before he lost himself to his readings. Dad," Nathan started, noticing there were only 2 plates. "Eat your fill. I'll join you when I'm done reading," his father said from behind the newspaper. "But—" "Not now, Nathan. The story is getting interesting." Mr. Verloren cut him off dismissively. Why did he even try? It was like this every night. Their father wouldn't touch a crumb until they both ate. The two ate until there was only half a loaf of bread and a few bites of potato.
"Dad?"
Lena said after swallowing a large bite of potato. The newspaper finally lowered, and the man looked over their plates. "Done?" They nodded. "Good," he said curtly, folding his paper and returning it to his coat. "Now you two can start working on closing up the bar. I've been running it all day and I think I've earned a break. Then it's off to bed, the both of you," he ordered before tearing off a portion of the old bread. They didn't argue and left the room.
"You're mad at me, aren't you?"
Lena asked quietly once they were in the front room and out of earshot. "No, I'm just really worried," Nathan sighed as he started to put up chairs.
"I'm sorry. I just wanted to help."
"I know," Nathan sighed. He paused from the chairs and walked over to Lena. He wrapped an arm around her and hugged her.
"Does this mean I'm off the hook?"
Lena asked with half a smile.
"We're okay, so I forgive you. This time. Now we just have to hope Dad doesn't kill us when he finds out."
"I think he might already know," Lena said worriedly as she moved to start gathering the empty mugs.
"Of course he does. He just doesn't know the specifics yet. And if we can get Miss Jorla on our side, we can keep playing down how bad it actually was."
Nathan shrugged. After some silence between them, he spoke in a serious tone.
"But Lena—"
"I know, Nathan. I know," Lena replied quietly. By the time they were finished, their backs were just as sore as their heads as they moved glumly into the room. Their father was still seated and had returned to reading his paper. He looked at them out of the corner of his eye as he turned the page. "Finished?"
"We are,"
They groaned. Good. Off to bed then, he ordered. They nodded and headed to their room. As Nathan picked up a lit candle, their father spoke up one more time. You two are certain nothing strange happened today?
Nothing, really,
Nathan lied effortlessly. Was the only reply Mr. Valoran gave as he turned the page of his paper. They squeezed into their tiny room. Neither could move an arm or a leg without hitting the other. After some pushing and repeated calls to move over, the two were on their respective sides and had the curtain drawn. Nathan blew out the candle with an icy breath, plunging them into near darkness. The only light left was the weak flicker of candles coming from underneath the door. With the dark, the cold of the night seemed to return in full force and creep up his limbs, sending shivers up his back, no matter how tightly he pulled the blanket around himself.
Good night, Lena. Good night, Nathan.